Hello, good morning everybody, and I'm really pleased to welcome you today to our first SEND and Alternative Provision webinar. I will be hosting the webinar today and will introduce our speakers shortly. I do want to give advance notice that some of our fire alarm test, so we are likely to pause at that point and mute our microphones, and then we'll resume once it's finished. In different circumstances, we would have face-to-face workshops and an opportunity to discuss and debate with each other, and hopefully this will be possible in the future, and I really look forward to that. However, the importance of this agenda and programme has meant that we've had to continue with our work via alternative means, and the purpose of this webinar is to listen and engage with all of you. There will be opportunities during the webinar for you to tell us what you think. Please use the chat box or make comments. We will make a record of these and publish answers should you not be able to answer them, or should we not be able to answer them all during the session. There is also a link to the opinion poll, which is anonymous, and the webinar will also be recorded and available after the event with subtitles. Nadia has published the link on the Q&A box. I'm pleased to be joined today by Councillor Tom Bruce, Cabinet Member for Children, Education and Youth Services, Stephen Forbes, Executive Director of Children and Adult Services, Zara Lowe, SEND Commissioner and Project Lead, and we're also supported by Nadia Naeem. This is the agenda for this morning, with a brief introduction from myself and then Councillor Bruce and Stephen, and then Zara will really talk us through in more detail the programme and the work to date. We'll allow some time at the end for questions and comments, but the webinar will finish on time at 11:30, and we will share the opinion poll results, so please do make the most of those opportunities. I'm pleased that we are joined today. Our first speaker is Councillor Tom Bruce, and he's unable to join us in person for the webinar, but he has provided us with a video introduction.
Hello there, my name is Councillor Tom Bruce, and I'm the Cabinet Member for Education and Children's Services here in Hounslow. A warm welcome to all of you who have joined us for our first SEND and Alternative Provision webinar here in Hounslow. I'm really sorry I can't be there with you today, but I'm told that we're welcoming parents and carers, early years settings, schools and colleges, and healthcare professionals. I appreciate you giving up some of your valuable time today to hear about the transformation journey so far and the next steps, particularly as I know that this period has and continues to be extremely stressful and extremely challenging for many of you. Substantial progress in Hounslow has already been made in improving SEND services and the alternative provision. But I know there is much more work to be done to improve services for children and young people with SEND, and also the experiences of their families. This needs to be done at a time when we are facing significant financial pressure as a council and managing increasing budget pressures on our high needs block. Transforming services will require collaboration with families and a close partnership working across care, education and health in order to deliver that change. This webinar is an opportunity for us to share with all of you where we are on our journey. It's also an opportunity for us to listen to your views. Therefore, throughout the webinar, we'll be posting opinion polls to give you the chance to let us know what you think. And at the end, you'll be able to ask any questions or make comments. The team are going to feed back to me a summary of the session, so I really look forward to hearing what you think and embarking on this transformation journey with you. Thank you.
I'm pleased to invite Stephen Forbes as our next speaker.
I do apologise. I pressed the mute button and it didn't go off, but it now is off. So I'll reintroduce myself. I'm Stephen Forbes. I'm the Executive Director for Children's Adult Services at London Borough of Hounslow. That makes me the Statutory Director of Adult Social Services and the Statutory Director of Children's Services. And it is for me one of the best opportunities for us in looking at the needs of children and young people with SEND, that actually we have both those functions, adults and children's, combined in the one department in Hounslow, which does actually help, I think, in terms of giving us a platform for transitional work. However, just to reflect a little on what Anita said, and I think what Councillor Bruce said, these are challenging times. They are challenging times for us globally in sense of the COVID-19 pandemic, and they're challenging times for all of you and for staff in our department about the management and delivery of services within that pandemic. However, beyond COVID-19 and the pandemic and 2020, which has turned out to be an incredibly challenging year, we have challenges in terms of SEND. The current regime, in terms of the SEND reforms, has been with us for a handful of years now. And I think it's fair to say that some of the outcome from the regime has been positive, some maybe less so. And we do have challenges. The whole SEND system nationally is challenged. There is no doubt about that. And in Hounslow, we have challenges that equal those that are experienced across the nation, but we have a few unique challenges as well. So on our way forward, we do have to take into account some of the hard realities of the world we face at the present time. One of those is our high needs block. The funding for SEND is significantly stressed. We are anticipating an overspend in the high needs block of around about 5 million in this financial year, with no perception that that will reduce unless we take significant action in the coming years. We have slightly higher levels of children and young people on education, health and care plans, with no apparent understanding in a sense of why that is. And we do need to understand that to understand if we're making best use of resources and the best use of the processes that we have within the SEND regime. And we have changes in the needs and the demands as well. So the population of children with their needs is changing and has changed over the last 10 to 15 years. And we need to get ahead of that and understand what that means for provision across schools, education settings, in the community, and for the services that we provide as a local authority. We have, before the COVID-19 pandemic, the government did make a clear statement that it would review the SEND regime. That seems to have at this moment been parked on the side because of the pandemic and having to respond to that. But it is absolutely imperative that government returns to that review. But in the meantime, we have to do what we can do locally to work within the current funding streams and the current regime and the current regulations. So today is hopefully a chance for us to collectively have a look at how we're operating and potentially look to whether or not there are opportunities. I hope you find today useful, informative. It is, as I think as Anita said and Councillor Bruce said, an opportunity to share, to listen, to learn and to challenge and to be open and transparent about what works well and what doesn't work well. If we can't do that, then we won't potentially maximise the opportunity for change and improvement locally. So I welcome you today. I hopefully look forward to answering some questions and engaging with you throughout the morning. Thank you.
For those of you who don't know me, I am the Interim Assistant Director for SEN and Disability, with responsibilities for the SEND service, including our short breaks offer and also alternative provision, as well as the strategic lead for SEND for the Council. I'm going to set the scene and present the case for the need to transform the SEND and alternative provision offer. I'll be presenting some of the data about demand and costs, and this is going to be put in the context of our statistical neighbours, who are those boroughs who are considered most similar to Hounslow, for example, the London boroughs of Ealing, Brent, Sutton, Hillingdon, etc. The SEND local offer in Hounslow does require rapid change and improvement so that all the children and young people in the borough receive the right help at the right time and within a sustainable budget. The high needs budget is part of the dedicated schools grant and funds all placements for those with EHC plans, children and young people accessing alternative provision, and also some central services for SEND. There was a 7.3 million overspend on the high needs budget in 2019 and 20, and a projected 4 to 5 million overspend for this financial year. This means there is a 12.8 million deficit on the DSG reserve by the end of March 2021, and without some urgent action, the DSG reserve deficit is projected to be between 17 to 19 million by the end of March 2022. Hounslow spends significantly more per capita on high needs provision than statistical neighbours, and also maintains an additional 7 educational health and care plans per 1,000 resident children compared to the statistical neighbours average. There has actually been a long-standing year-on-year growth in EHC plans at all levels, well above the average for London. Hounslow's average growth in new plans is around 11% per year over the last 3 years. Hounslow places 52% of children with EHC plans in specialist provision compared to 43% of our statistical neighbours. We are aware, of course, that Hounslow does have a range of specialist provision in borough. So this means that the demand and expenditure in Hounslow is much higher than most similar authorities. Hounslow schools and parents made 36% more initial requests for EHC needs assessment than statistical neighbours, and 52% of the plans last year were issued at ages 3, 4 and 5 years old. The combination of these factors that I've described has led to significant and unsustainable financial pressures locally. This is also a problem nationally, where other authorities do face similar challenges. Government funding has not increased in line with the changes in SEND demand and complexity, with additional funding generally related to increases in general population only, with little recognition of the extended responsibilities now up to the age of 25. However, we have welcomed the additional funding from central government that has been received. We cannot continue with the status quo as it stands, and this does provide us with an opportunity for us to collectively think differently about options to manage demand whilst ensuring best outcomes for children and young people. Our aim is to create an offer that demonstrates high quality services that deliver positive outcomes for children and young people and has a trajectory towards long-term financial stability. At this point, we'd like to pause to allow you to reflect. I've provided quite a lot of data in my presentation, and we'd also like to hear from you. So please, can you type into the chat window the first 3 words that come to mind when you hear the word inclusion? Thank you, colleagues. I can see various ideas coming through, which I'll publish so that those of you can see our thoughts, and it is appreciated. At one moment I had some slight anxiety there was nobody there, because obviously I can't see your faces, so it's very reassuring to see messages, and thanks very much for that. I will proceed with my presentation while you continue to think about inclusion. As many of you will be aware, the current joint Hounslow SEND strategy started us on our journey of transformation, and this slide summarises some of the work that has been achieved so far. We also know that the educational outcomes for children and young people with SEN and/or disabilities are good. They achieve well and make good progress at assessment points in comparison with their peers in London and nationally. We know you are all working hard to support children and young people achieving their outcomes. Initial analysis of spend from the high needs block gave us some initial lines of inquiry. We then explored these by having telephone conversations with a range of partners, providers and other stakeholders, including Hounslow Parent Carer Forum in the summer term. And Zara will share the findings from these conversations later. From the key areas of these key areas of focus have been identified: future SEND provision and placements, for preparation for adulthood and alternative provision, and Zara will discuss these in more detail shortly. At this point, I'm pleased to introduce Zara Lowe, who will take us through the next part of the webinar. Please remember to keep adding comments and asking questions during the presentation.
Hello everybody, thank you for giving up some of your time to hear about what we have discovered so far about the challenges around SEND and alternative provision, and what you, our partners, have told us in terms of both the opportunities and challenges, as well as your ideas. I will also be talking about our plans for moving this programme forward. The pandemic has meant that we've had to do things differently to how we had originally planned, as we had hoped to hold a number of different workshops. We would really welcome your feedback on how this new approach could be improved. So with the programme focusing on three key areas: future SEND provision and placements, preparation for adulthood and alternative provision, we have carried out some detailed analysis and review of each focus area and spoken to partners directly to get your views. And the aims of these conversations were to engage and work with partners, to gain a deeper understanding from you on the strengths and challenges for SEND in Hounslow, and to hear your ideas and solutions. I will talk you through each focus area and share with you a summary of our findings, starting off with future SEND provision and placements. So in January this year, there were 2,498 children and young people in Hounslow with education, health and care plans. 68% of those children with an EHCP are in specialist provision, and this specialist provision also includes our special schools, our SEN centres and the independent and non-maintained special schools. When we break down this further, we see that 30% are in our own special schools and 15% are in independent special schools. The remaining children are either in our mainstream schools or in other local authority schools. This graph is a little challenging to see, so I'll talk you through it as much as I can. It provides an overview of the different types of settings that Hounslow children and young people with SEND are placed at. Hounslow is the darkest green bar at the top of each area, And the bar below shows us outer London, the third bar down is England, and the bottom bar is our 5 closest statistical neighbours, which Anita referred to earlier. So the first set of data at the top shows us that Hounslow has a much higher proportion of children and young people with SEND, with education, health and care plans in comparison to other areas. As we move down the graph, we see that compared to other areas, Hounslow has a lower proportion of pupils with SEND in mainstream schools. There are 10.1 pupils per 1,000 of the 2 to 18-year-old population, compared to 12.6 in our statistical neighbours. In contrast, we have a higher proportion of children in specialist settings, and this includes resource provision or SEN units, which are attached to mainstream schools, and special schools. In our special schools, there are 12.7 per 1,000 of the 2 to 18-year population in Hounslow, compared to 8.6 per 1,000 for our statistical neighbours. Again, this is seen with our non-maintained and independent special schools, where Hounslow has 2.9 per 1,000 compared to its statistical neighbours, which has 1.9 per 1,000. So this slide provides us with a detailed breakdown of what types of needs the different types of settings are meeting. The bright red colour, which is the I guess the kind of the largest proportion and each type of setting, is for autistic spectrum disorder. And as you can see here, it is the most prevalent primary need across all our different types of settings. We can also see that 40% of all children in special schools have been identified with having ASD as a primary need. And yet we see a much lower proportion of children identified as having ASD as a primary need in our mainstream schools. You can also see on this slide that across all settings, there are a number of children that have been identified in the other group. And really, this is just a plea to those of you who do fill out the census that we really need to understand what type of primary need our children have. So please do apply a specific area of need to each child. We can also see from this chart that there are a higher proportion of children and young people that have social, emotional and mental health needs that are placed into independent special schools in comparison to any other type of setting. So that data gives us a general overview of where children and young people with SEND are being placed at the moment and what types of needs they might have. We want to also share with you some of the things you, our partners, have told us. Over the summer, we spoke to a range of different partners, including the Parent Carer Forum, our schools, alternate provision providers, colleges and care. We want to share this feedback with you. But we also recognise that we haven't spoken to everybody, which is why we're holding this webinar, so that we can hear from all of you. So what did you tell us? You told us that respite care was a real strength in our offer to children and young people with SEND, and you said that the respite care service listens to what parents need and does what is possible to meet the needs of children, and it has the knack of being able to stretch the pound. You said that the local authority has improved in its communications and co-production. You felt that some of the special schools could do more to work with families and that accessing therapies was an issue, including CAMS, which has a big waiting list. A reoccurring theme across all 3 key areas of focus was around what you said as a lack of providers for young people with challenging behaviour. You also told us what you felt we needed to strengthen in terms of the provision in Hounslow and said that there seemed to be particular challenges in terms of secondary provision for young people with SEND. You said that you felt that those children and young people who had social and emotional health needs but did not have an education, health and care plan also had difficulties accessing support. And you also said that there needed to be more short break options for young people with SEND who were 18 and older, and that there were a lack of suitable places for children who had additional needs as well as learning difficulties, and a lack of places for those who had medical needs but did not have learning difficulties. Several partners also said that they thought the additional resource that had been put into reducing the waiting lists for ASD assessment has had a knock-on effect on provision, Interestingly, in Hounslow, there is a link between an ASD diagnosis and a specialist placement. The majority of children with an ASD diagnosis should be able to go to their local mainstream school, and really only those with the most complex needs will benefit from a more specialist placement. Both schools and colleges have fed back through this engagement process that as a local authority, we are sending them too many consultations and too many inappropriate consultations. On the final slide of our future SEND provision, you also told us that we needed to look at how we forecast need and planned our need for future placement, and that this is the case across all phases, early years, primary, secondary, and post-16. Alongside this, you told us that in early years, there is a concern that there are some children that are not being considered for placements because they are not yet known to education and are currently only known to health. You told us that the partnership between education and health needs to get better in managing these notifications about very young children who are likely to need specialist provision when they become school-aged. You also told us that specialist nursery placements should only be allocated to those children who have the most complex needs, as the majority of children should be able to have their needs met in a mainstream early years setting, and those placed in specialist nursery will require a special school place when they are school aged. In addition to this, it was suggested that the specialist nursery offer is reviewed and brought in line with the early years 15-hour offer for children who do not have SEND access. You also said that unless a child has an education, health and care plan, you could not access the relevant support for them, and that you felt it was important that we took into account that there's been a significant growth in Hounslow in the last 10 years and that nearly all of our primary schools have expanded. You felt that the reason for the higher number of education, health and care plans at ages 3, 4 and 5 is due to better identification from early years providers and diagnosis coming in quicker at preschool. Some feedback from our mainstream schools said that they had seen some examples of where a child had been supported in an SEN centre at primary age, but when it came to transition to a secondary school, it was sometimes difficult to find an appropriate placement for them, with both mainstream schools and special schools saying they were unable to meet needs. So this brings us to our first opinion poll question. So if you can use the link that we've either sent to you in the email that we sent out yesterday, or the same link that's been included in the chat box to answer the first question. The first question is really just to understand what you feel about the feedback that I've shared with you on future SEND provision and placements, whether you agree, disagree, or don't know. As Anita said earlier, we will share your anonymised responses at the end of the webinar.
This is a building announcement. The fire alarms.
Okay, the fire alarm's going off, so I'm going to put us on mute for a couple of minutes. Okay, I'm going to move us on to preparation for adulthood. I'm going to be muting us again in another minute or so when the fire practice. Okay, so that's certainly a learning lesson for us not to hold a webinar on a Wednesday morning if we're in Hounslow House. I'm now going to take you through our findings in relation to preparation for adulthood. So over the last 6 years, we've seen a huge change in what young people with SEND are able to access in relation to education. And the changes we've seen are very much linked to the 2014 Children and Families Act, which extended the age of eligibility for those with a statement of SEN and still in education from 16 to 25 years old. The Children and Families Act also sets out a range of duties towards young people preparing for adulthood. These include the provision of information, advice and support, working together to achieve outcomes, and strategic joint commissioning through the local offer. So just to give you a little bit of data, in January 2014...
This is a building announcement. Testing of the fire alarm is now complete.
Phew.
Please respond to any further alarms. This is a building announcement. Testing of the fire alarm is now complete. Please respond to any further alarms.
In January 2014, there were 104 young people in Hounslow, aged 16 to 25, with statements of SEND. And then 3 years later, in January 2017, this had increased to 329. And by January 2019, had increased to 521. And then in terms of the young people attending our FE colleges, in January 2017, 193 young people in Hounslow, aged 16 to 25, with SEND statements or plans attended FE colleges. In January 2019, this increased from 193 to 293. We've got a good education offer for young people aged 16 to 25 in Hounslow, and young people are also able to benefit from being able to travel out of Hounslow and access post-16 provision in other local authority areas. We work closely with West Thames College, who are the general further education provider in Hounslow, and also commission Project Search, which is a one-year programme that's been set up to provide training and education, which will lead to employment. In Hounslow, there are a lot of positives about our offer for young people with SEND, and these include Project Search, which is what I've just talked about, where 70% of last year's cohort progressed into employment. In January 2018, 87.6% of 17-year-olds who have special educational needs in Hounslow participated in education or employment with training. In Hounslow, twice the proportion of adults with disabilities are in settled accommodation in comparison to the national average. And in 2017-18, 17.2% of young people with learning disabilities were in paid employment. This is actually higher in comparison to London and national figures, but absolutely an area we need to continue to develop. So some of the challenges that we've got around our preparation for adulthood offer are around the current offer. So the post-16 offer in a mainstream college often spans across 3 days, and some families are looking for more. Supporting young people to prepare for adulthood needs to start a lot earlier, and the whole transition into adult services also needs to improve. And these challenges came up during the telephone conversations that we had with you. So just to share some of the things that you told us during the telephone conversations, you told us that the relationship between a local authority and providers is good, and you said that the post-16 team know the students well. You said there needed to be clearer pathways for 16 to 25-year-olds to ensure there wasn't duplication in provision or empty places, and to enable families to make informed choices. You said that there were gaps in provision for those with the most complex needs, and that it was a problem that the service from the special educational needs sensory support team stopped when a student finished secondary school, and that it should continue into post-16 provision. You told us that you would benefit from having projections about student numbers and needs to enable you to plan your programmes better. When we spoke to our providers, you told us that you were inclusive and could meet a wide range of needs. And Project Search, the employment-based programme, and Oakland Schools were strengths in the area, as well as the access to community activities. The issue around lack of data came up again, and the need to have more to enable better transitions. It was felt that the quality of education, health and care plans had improved over the last 18 months and had become more outcome focused. There's no doubt that the conversations we had with you over the summer were rich with insight. We really appreciated your honesty and openness with us, and hope that you're also sharing some of that with us today at the webinar. You told us that you were concerned about young people who were being placed into residential provision far away from home and wondered why we would not access capital funding to develop our own local residential provision. Interestingly, you said that lockdown and having to do more things virtually had brought real benefits and helped introduce different ways of working. And it had also enabled parents and carers to get more involved and gave them the opportunity to see what the provision was like. The need to strengthen transition to adult services was a reoccurring theme in which partners felt more work needed to be done. Some partners felt that information around preparation for adulthood was good, and others felt that it was not so accessible. So, on to our second opinion poll question. Again, based on what I've just fed back to you on the preparation for adulthood focus area, would you agree or disagree, or don't know, in terms of the views that we've shared with you from our partners that we spoke to? We'll be able to see the results from this at the end of the presentation. Okay, I'm going to move on to our final area of focus, which is alternative provision. Alternative provision is funded through the high needs block, which also funds SEND provision. 10% of the overall high needs block is allocated to this area. And just to give you a bit of background on our alternative provision offer in Hounslow, alternative provision is education outside of school. It's arranged by the local authority or schools for pupils up to age 18 who do not attend mainstream school for reasons such as behaviour, which results in a permanent or fixed period exclusion or an off-site direction by a school, health reasons, including physical or mental health needs, and where a child is awaiting placement in a mainstream or special school. This slide provides an overview of who we are likely to see in alternative provision. The information provides a national view and isn't Hounslow specific, but it provides a good insight to the characteristics of this cohort. I won't go through every single bullet point, and I'm sure that these won't be a surprise to many of you. This slide provides us with an overview of what the alternative provision offer is in Hounslow. Our Key Stage 3 and 4 provision also supports students who have had social and emotional mental needs identified as a primary need on their education, health and care plan. As you can see from this slide, Hounslow has a broad alternative provision offer. So what did you tell us about alternative provision in Hounslow? You told us more about the background of the children you are seeing going into alternative provision, and that often children have experienced significant trauma in their lives, and that it is likely that it is a one-off significant event that's been a trigger. You told us that children and young people being placed into alternative provision have more complex needs than ever before. And you also said that the local authority would benefit from having a clear set of expectations in place about the levels of intervention they would expect to see from a school before a child is excluded. You gave some suggestions on what might work and of initiatives that are working in other local authority areas. For example, dual registration and putting more preventative practice in place in schools to prevent permanent exclusion. You also said that there were some challenges around the offer at the pupil referral unit in Hounslow, and the fixed number of classes for a fixed number of children was not helpful, and there needed to be more flexibility. The issue around just having one site for young people in Key Stage 3 and 4 was also a constraint, as some young people were not able to be on the same site as others because of their bail conditions, for example. And this was causing a real problem in placing young people, as not all young people could be placed on the same site. You suggested some more ideas of what have worked in other areas and what could work in Hounslow. For example, in Doncaster, they have a programme for young people in Key Stage 4 where they are able to access a mix of education and a work placement. This is our final slide, which captures your feedback on alternative provision. And you said that we needed to look more closely at the alternative provision offer from the independent providers that we use to ensure that we achieve better value for money and manage the quality of the provision. You also said that children moving into the borough with special educational needs was a challenge. And this seemed to be a reoccurring theme across all three areas of focus as well, particularly if children were moving into the area with special educational needs and without an assessment. You said it is difficult to place them in the most appropriate provision for their needs and to access the right support at the right time. You said there needs to be a better offer for young people aged 14 and over, and that schools needed more specialist support to enable them to support pupils at risk of exclusion. You also praised the provision at the bridge. I'm going to move us on to our final opinion poll question, which is in keeping with the previous two questions. So based on your experience and your views, would you agree, disagree, or don't know in terms of the feedback that we've shared with you from partners on alternative provision? Okay, so that was an introduction to some of our findings on the three key areas. I'm now going to talk to you about our proposed approach and how we take this work forward. We are proposing to create 8 separate work streams, which will all contribute towards transforming SEND and alternative provision over the next 5 years. The 8 work streams will be effective use of resources, focusing on 2020 to 21, partnership working and joint commissioning, SEND practice, SEND policy, inclusive local provision, managing the market, information advice and support, and preparation for adulthood. Within each of the 8 work streams, you can see here that we have provided a very high-level overview of what each work stream will set out to achieve. So within our effective use of resources work stream, we'd be looking to review the current budget streams and identify opportunities for achieving better value for money. We'd also be looking to review our complex cases, and where children or young people are in placements further away from home, identify opportunities in local settings for them to be placed in. Within our partnership working and joint commissioning work stream, we'd be looking to develop a SEND commissioning strategy, agree governance arrangements with our partners, strengthen our data management approach, and build a culture within health, education and care partners to work together to achieve the best outcomes for a child or young person with SEND. Moving on to our SEND practice work stream, we'd be looking and have already started to implement work around improving practice and skills for SEND professionals. And we'd also be looking to strengthen that joint working across teams. Within the SEND policy work stream, we'd be looking to implement the newly reviewed and streamlined SEND processes and identify and support children and young people who are approaching key transition points. Within the inclusive local provision work stream, we'd be looking to develop a 0 to 25 year SEND sufficiency plan, which was focused around looking at our historic, current and projected needs and trends and demand. Be looking to recommission local provision to enable it to meet a wider range of needs and ensure that provision is in place for children and young people with challenging behaviour, and that support is also in place for families. Within this work stream, we'd also be looking at establishing pathways for children and young people at risk of exclusion. The Managing the Market work stream will focus around establishing a market management strategy with our independent providers. It would also be focused on updating our alternative provision offer and implementing a robust contract management approach with independent and non-maintained providers. Within this work stream, we'd also be looking at around agreeing clear expectations with schools on behaviour management. And then on to the final two work streams, we have information, advice and support. And this is really around ensuring that families and professionals are able to access quality information on support and provision, strengthening our local offer and developing a clearly defined SEND early help offer. The final work stream, preparation for adulthood, is around improving transitions to support young people at transition, upskilling professionals to improve the focus on long-term outcomes, for example, independent living and employment, identifying young people with complex needs approaching transition, and addressing any gaps in provision. So this slide sets out some of the key activities that we are planning over the next year and by when. This term, our focus will be on reviewing our current spend and identifying any opportunities for achieving better value for money. Also this term, we will continue the review of our children with more complex needs who have been placed further away from home and reviewing the appropriateness of their placement. We've also already done a lot of work in terms of reviewing SEND processes, and this term the focus will be on implementing and embedding those policies within our practices. We're really proud of the new training programme that's been set up to support teaching staff in our mainstream settings, and this will be further embedded over the autumn term. The training programme includes bite-sized modules and can be accessed virtually. Some of the training is free and there are charges for some of the more specialist training. We would encourage all our settings to sign up to the training and support. Our ambition is to enable the majority of children and young people with special educational needs to do well, be safe and be happy in their local school and community. Throughout the autumn and spring term, we'll be working closely with our special schools and alternative provision providers, sharing our data and analysis with them and reviewing the feedback that you, our partners, have provided, making sure that we as a local authority are commissioning the right type of provision from each school to meet the changing needs that we are seeing in the area, and making sure that our local schools can meet needs so that children and young people don't have to travel long distances to go to school. Because as well as being further away from home, these placements are often at a higher cost to our own provision and often don't produce the best outcomes for children. Recently, we have reviewed the way we fund our SEN centres to ensure that all our centres are funded in a fair and equitable way. And in the spring term, we will have completed a similar review, which will look at how we fund our special schools. Again, the aim will be to achieve consistency in funding across all schools. And then by summer, we will have developed the SEND commissioning strategy, which will set out what we as a local authority want to commission for children and young people with special educational needs over the next 3 years. Around the same time, we will also develop the market management strategy, which will focus on the relationships with our independent providers, contracting arrangements, and how we want to work with them in the future. So by autumn term 2021, we would expect to start seeing our newly recommissioned provision, the impact of an upskilled workforce, and the benefits of the newly embedded processes for SEND, which will include supporting young people at transition. So how do we know we're making a difference? How do we know these proposals will deliver what we've set out to do? These are some of the things we will be able to measure our performance by. The performance indicators that sit along the arrow going up are areas where we would expect to see an increase. So we'd expect to see the number of children with SEN support plans increase. We'd also expect to see an increase in the number of children and young people with education, health and care plans being placed into mainstream settings. In addition, we would also expect to see an improvement in what families' views are on SEN services. So in terms of what we would expect to see going down, This would include the number of education, health and care plans being requested, as well as the number of plans being issued. And this would be because by strengthening inclusion in our schools and upskilling our workforce, more children and young people will be able to access the support they require without the need to have an education, health and care plan. By developing our local provision, we would also expect to reduce our reliance on independent special schools. By strengthening our alternative provision offer and earlier intervention, we would expect to see a reduction in the number of children and young people who are being excluded. So that concludes the end of the presentation on what we have discovered and our early plans for transformation. I will now pass you back to Anita to facilitate the questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for taking us through that. We are now coming to the close of the webinar and would like to give you an opportunity to add any further comments or ask some questions. I would like to thank everybody for their 3 words on what inclusion means to them. I have taken those notes down and we'll find a way to publish and share that. There was one question about the training in schools, which I will confirm and come back to you about that. I'm just looking to see if there's any more questions. Stephen has also joined us, should anyone... Right, so there's a question about analysis being completed on how savings are generated. Right, in having a higher percentage of disabled adults in paid employment. I think that's quite a detailed question. I think that's asking us if any saving from adults' social care could support those young people. I don't really, it's a good question to ask. I don't know if we've got the answer to that, Stephen.
I would say there's nothing wrong in that challenge, and it's a very systemic view. I think the issue there is that would require government to see the flow of money would flow, because you're talking about very different budgets flowing through very different organisations. So fundamentally, I absolutely believe that people with disabilities should be in the workforce, and that our special educational needs process should launch young people into the workforce wherever possible. And if that investment happened, yes, it would be good to see a reduction in benefit expenditure and an increase in tax gain, but I'm not sure government would flow the money into local government or vice versa.
Thank you, Stephen. I can't see any other specific questions, and I do thank everybody. Just make sure that you've done your opinion polls, because we'll be showing that at the end of the webinar. So I suggest that we move on to the what's next. So I'm hoping that we haven't overwhelmed you with the information today. There has been quite a lot of data and in our presentation. I'm aware you may not be able to see me, but I'm going to carry on. So what we want to do is engage with children and young people. We need to publish our high needs Stephen, I think we've got a bit of a technical hitch. Yeah. Colleagues, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but we seem to have some technical issues with the webinar, and we have more or less come to the end. So I really apologise for that, because we've obviously wanted to share our opinion poll. So I am going to just formally close the webinar. I would like to thank you all for your participation and for Councillor Bruce and Stephen Forbes' contributions, and to thank my team, Nadia and Zara, who organised the webinar.